Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be reviewing an article called Face Off on the Grand Chessboard, and this is in Asia Times, and it's really talking about how China is managing to break through all the sanctions that the United States is putting on it, and how China is really winning the tech war, the trade war with the United States. So the article starts off talking about the recent launch of the Huawei Mate 60 Pro, which sent a seismic shiver across the global semiconductor realm. And it's really because we did not expect for like another decade for China to be able to mass produce 7 nanometer chips. And it turns out they were able to mass produce 7 nanometer chips because of the innovations in their domestic supply chain and innovations in their domestic technology. So the article says several years of the most drastic sanctions, culminating last year in the United States Chips and Science Act, had failed to stop China's technological juggernaut, which is Huawei. On the contrary, a cryptic Chinese poem expresses the struggle. The boat has sailed past the looming mountains with their screeching baboons. The boat has sailed. Okay, this entire video is just dedicated to figuring out what that's supposed to mean. The boat has sailed past the looming mountains with those screeching baboons. Okay, so I think what they're saying is that America is a group of screeching baboons, and they've managed to overcome the complaints, the temper tantrum that America is putting on. I think calling America screeching baboons is a very accurate one. I don't know how they had this ancient Chinese poem. I wonder if this came out before America was created or not. I mean, it doesn't actually say it's ancient Chinese poems, but I always think of Chinese poems as being ancient. Anyways, we cracked the code for this. So leave a comment in the comment section below if you think that's what the definition means, and if you think screeching baboons is a good comparison for the United States. The Huawei Mate 60 Pro is a masterful move in an unfolding global chess game, but there is much more coming. Let's look at the big picture. Okay, so what is this big picture they're talking about? Think back to the 2008 Beijing Olympics opening ceremony. China spared no expense in staging a magnificent show combining artistry and technology that narrated the trajectory of Chinese culture and civilization from its ancient origins to the boundless potential of high-tech future. Synchronicity and power on a breathtaking scale. Okay, so one thing to mention here is I put this out into the ether. I have no idea if anyone heard what I said, but I, over a decade ago, said, like, listen, China, you need to quit thinking of yourselves decoupled from your history, because your history provides a lot of legitimacy to your governmental system. You have to say that there's a continuous path of growth for millennia, because that leads to the notion that you are a stable country, that you're a country growing in the right direction, and you understand your historical roots and have learned lessons from it. I think a lot of countries, when modernization, industrialization came, and it came in the form of the Western world, a lot of countries started to doubt their own culture, doubt their own history, and they assumed that in order to modernize, in order to industrialize their countries, they had to inevitably westernize. And so countries tended to decouple from their historical roots and tended to pretend like those never happened, that never happened. And because of that, a lot of these countries had what I would consider to be legitimacy crises, because their people doubted the form of governance that took over after they decoupled from their historical roots. And you saw this in China a lot, where they really destroyed a lot of cultural artifacts because they wanted to pretend like none of that mattered, and all that mattered was their really westernization of their country. And so I think Xi Jinping, to a large extent, really took them back to their roots and said, no, actually, the Communist Party of China and the Chinese government as a whole and the Chinese nation state is really a civilization state that has historical roots going back millennia. And that provided a strong foundation for the legitimacy of their civilization state. And so I think Xi Jinping understands that. I said over a decade ago that's what they should be doing, and it seems like that's exactly what they did do in 2008. Many were ecstatic, but while the Beijing show impressed most of the world, it sent shivers down the spines of some Western elites who are more and more terrified about China's growing power and self-confidence. Okay, so this was 2008, and they're terrified because they really wanted to convince the world that you needed to Westernize in order to modernize and industrialize. And they wanted to do this because then you put these other countries in their realm, in their wheelhouse, where these other countries are, instead of innovating in their own ways, given their own cultural, civilizational background, they're innovating in a Western way. And so they're playing catch up. They're reacting to the West instead of being proactive in terms of how they do things. And so this understanding China's historical roots is deeply terrifying to the West because they want these countries to be reacting to them instead of being proactive. Okay, so wheels were set in motion to slow down the Chinese juggernauts advance at all costs, even if it meant damaging the synergistic partnership between the West and China, which had brought enormous growth and profitability for both. So yes, I'm sure that's the case. The West loved to exploit the Chinese populace whenever the Chinese populace was poor and they couldn't accept high wages if they wanted to have jobs at all in China. And so they were willing to do that, but once China actually managed to pay its workers properly, managed to create a functioning civilization, then people got scared, and they only continued for a few more years. And whenever Trump became president, that's when things really started to heat up. But they allowed their greed to overrule their desire for dominance forever. And I think that's great for China because China managed to get out from under the thumb of the West because of the greed of the West. And it's not that it's inevitable either. It's really just because of the leadership of Xi Jinping and his most recent prior leaders of the CPC that allowed that to happen, because it's entirely possible that you could have had traitorous leaders who were perfectly happy with not increasing the situation for the average Chinese person, which is really what happened in the West, where you have a ton of leaders in places like France, the United Kingdom, places like this, who are completely happy with the average person in their own country not benefiting from the advances of their nation. And they're perfectly happy with just lining their own pockets at the expense of their own people. And China was just not like that. China was an anomaly in that case, where they were actually willing to do what it took to help out their own nation state versus selling them out to the Western world. And the West didn't understand that because the West is led by greedy Zionists. And for them, the notion of putting your people first, sacrificing things for your people, it just did not make sense to them. So good for China, bad for the United States, which is what we like on this channel. Okay. So I think this is all worth reading here. This is where I think each side made a fatal misjudgment by projecting their own ideology on the other side. Instinctively, the West thought, surely when China attains the means, it will act like we do, seeking hegemony and aiming to deal a death blow to its waning rival. So this is exactly what I warned China about over a decade ago. You do not want to compete with the United States when it comes to creating chaos and disorder in the world, particularly since China is not a country that historically has been good at creating chaos and destabilization. They are a very functioning bureaucracy. They have political leaders that are really bureaucrats, that really are efficient bureaucrats, not like the negative connotations of bureaucracy in the West. And so for them, they are a country that has its historical roots in creating order and stability. They call it a harmonious society in China. And for them, like I said, I really tried to emphasize this, and I hope someone was listening because they seem to be doing this. I'm like, you have to focus on that. You have to lean into it. Don't be reactive. Don't play catch up to the West in terms of being a destructive force, being an imperialistic, expansionistic force in the world. You have to be, well, one, I said be a tall empire instead of a wide empire. So if you've ever played 4X strategy games, there's really two strategies you have. One is to be as expansionistic as possible, a wide empire, and get a ton of territory to use the resources, et cetera, et cetera. And the other is to be a tall empire and focus on other things like the science tech tree, and to focus on political and economic issues instead of controlling as much land as possible. And it was up to China to show its neighbors because the United States was trying to block it in, particularly in the South China Sea area. It was up to China to show its neighbors that it was really focused on order, harmony, stability, growth, versus being similar to the United States. And that was the trap that the United States thought it could get China in, which was if China was expansionistic, then there was this tightening noose that would have gone around China's neck. And China recognized this, and they said, no, let's focus on building things not only domestically, but abroad, infrastructure, communication technology. Let's focus on being a trade empire, mercantile empire. And they even focus on things that I don't think historically would have been their strength, which they focus on being a naval power versus having a strong army. I mean, they certainly have a very large army, but they really focus on the Navy and shipbuilding, which historically has not been a China thing. They just focus on their land-based power. And so really China just did everything right, and they did everything that I thought they should have done. So very exciting. And the United States was not expecting this at all. The United States thought that there would have been continuity there, like how the United Kingdom was an exploitative colonial power that focused on destruction, divide and conquer tactics, co-opting. The United States inherited that mentality, that hegemonic mentality, and they thought China would be the exact same. And China said, oh, no, we're not going to be reactive. We're not going to play catch up with you. We're going to do our own thing. And it got that noose from over their heads and put them on a different path. And so I think this was really all they could have done to be successful. And so it's anyone's guess about how the West is going to handle this, but China has won at this point. It's just a matter of, is the West going to be gracious in its defeat, or is it going to try to take the world down with it? I think it's going to try to take the world down with it, which is why I am currently living in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, that's scary. Okay, so the article goes on to say, seeing China as an existential threat, the West launched a ferocious full spectrum attack. China bet erroneously that the West would act pragmatically as China would do and not try to kill the proverbial goose that lays the golden eggs. Yeah, China doesn't understand the type of neurotic Zionist that is in charge of the West. And I think they're starting to get the picture here, because both countries think the other is going to act the way they're acting. The West in a chaotic, destructive, neurotic way, and China in a harmonious, orderly, creationist type of way, liking to build things and being logical. They really focus on STEM. Like, their entire mentality is a science, technology, engineering, math type of mentality. And China just doesn't understand the wild instability of the West. And so that's something that they're starting to grapple with. And if you need any help with that, my consulting fee is very reasonable. So I understand how the West thinks, and I understand why they're wrong, and I am completely supportive of Russia, China. So just let me know. After all, China is the biggest buyer of Western debt, $4 trillion in U.S. Treasury since 2008 financial crisis, a huge market for high value added goods and services from the West, a manufacturing partner that enabled brands like Apple and Tesla to become global behemoths. So China thought, given all of this integration, that the United States would just allow itself to be one of two great powers. And the United States just absolutely could not do that. I don't think China recognized that the United States win conditions are so alien to China that they were never going to be compatible. And I knew that was going to be the case. So China was fully integrated into the supply chain of Western companies. Hardly anything could be produced without input from China. But they didn't realize that the United States is a winner-takes-all strategy. They don't believe in win-win cooperation. They believe in either win-lose or lose-lose. And the only way win-lose can occur, so here's how the United States does it. If the United States can win, they will win at your expense. If the United States cannot win, and that was called win-lose. If the United States cannot win, they make sure no one can win, which is lose-lose. China has a different strategy, a different tool in its toolbox, which is they like to have win-win cooperation. And it just so happens to benefit them on the international stage too, because whenever they have win-win cooperation, it provides not only for their own nation, but it also provides an extra competitor for the United States. And so with Russia, China can have win-win cooperation where they become a stronger competitor to the United States, and then Russia becomes a stronger competitor to the United States. And so this is something that the United States just can't compete with, because the United States is not able to have that type of win-win cooperation. That's just not a toolbox in the United States toolbox. Or that's just not a tool in the United States toolbox. Okay, so China was therefore caught completely off guard by the series of exclusionary measures launched under Barack Obama administration, including the Trans-Pacific Partnership and culminating in outright trade and technology sanctions, siege and wars orchestrated by Donald Trump and expanded and intensified under the Joe Biden administration. Yeah, this is a thing where China didn't understand this. All right, I'm going to try to fly through the rest of this article because I'm taking a little bit too long on this. Oh, wow, we're not even partway through. All right, this is going to be a two-part article, I think, because I'm speaking a lot about this. China doesn't understand, or didn't understand at the time, that the American democracy is really just a matter of they switch puppets, they switch figureheads whenever they need to gain trust back. And so they thought, wait a minute, Barack Obama is screwing us over. Let's get a Republican in there. And I don't think they helped, but they said, okay, a Republican would be better to have in office because maybe they would work more with us. And a Republican came in office and continued and intensified the policies of Barack Obama. And so then you have China just scratching their head saying, well, wait a minute, this is a democracy. Why is the Democrat and Republican doing the exact same thing? And they're just increasing their hostile foreign policy towards us. And then they said, okay, well, Trump was even worse than Barack Obama. Maybe let's just go back to a Democrat. And then Joe Biden took office, and he was even worse than Trump. And so they recognized at this point, I think, that no matter who's in office, there is this Zionist banking cartel oligarchical control of the country that is nonstop intensifying hostilities towards Russia and China. And so I think that was the light bulb moment when they went from Democrat, Republican, Democrat, and things just kept getting worse and worse, that they recognized that there's no resetting relations with a country like America, because America is controlled behind the scenes by a deep state that is going to continue the same policies over and over again, because those are policies that will help them maintain control, a vice-like grip on the levers of power, which is money. So I'm actually going to stop this here, and we can continue this for a part 2, because I'm not even halfway through this article and I've spent 17-ish minutes on this. So if you found this video to be informative, helpful, please leave us a thumbs up. Please leave us a comment in the comment section. Please subscribe to our channels on YouTube and Rumble. This is the article in Asia Times Face Off on the Grand Chessboard, and it's a very, very interesting article. I obviously have a lot to say on it. So be prepared for part 2. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.